Continuing our series of lectures on science fiction, this is Lecture 8, The Alien and in Me, meaning both the alien and its relationship to humanity, and the alien within humanity, or how humanity can alienate itself from other people. Because when we talk about the alien, what we're really talking about is the other, that which we don't understand, that which we don't know, and therefore, because we don't know, what it is. We don't know what it can do to us, so we're talking about fear. That is what the alien represents. We can almost say that the aliens, at least in their depiction in narrative, especially in science fiction, are the collective fears of a society. So if we map out the 20th century, we can probably find the alien as a stand-in for fears of invasion, often by non-whites, like War of the Worlds. Yes, it is an alien invasion that is in the story that is destroying humanity, but it is also about the British and their fear of being invaded by neighboring nations. We can also talk about fear of contamination or infection, which is a very common alien trope, especially in movies. The alien having some sort of like um, back contamination or environmental concern. But as far back as Dracula, we can see a representation of this fear. How so? Dracula is not an alien, right? But Dracula does stand in for those quote unquote weird Eastern European people who are coming into our country. And we don't know what they can do to us. So even as far back as Dracula or as contemporary as the movies right now, we fear the contamination and the infection that the alien may bring, the other. Um, we fear also the losing out of more advanced technologies, and this is important because the aliens always have something we don't. Not always, right? There are some aliens that are depicted as having less or being inferior, but how often are alien depictions of these beings always being superior to us? Superior mostly in technology, although they may be superior in other ways, but technologically, especially, they're often superior in their technology. We may also fear communism or a kind of brainwashing during the Cold War era. Aliens became symbols of mind control and the loss of will, right? As in Heinlein's The Puppet Masters, wherein these aliens attach themselves to your brain and they essentially control you. So the alien is always a representation of the other. So while I'm using alien here to talk about an extraterrestrial, I am also doubling the meaning of alien throughout this presentation to talk about our understanding of the other, especially the foreigner, uh, that which doesn't belong here, that which came from somewhere else, because often the two are conflated in these narratives. So here's some example, one of an early example of what we're talking about. These aliens always have the ability to look like us. Take, for instance, John W. Campbell Jr.'s story, Who Goes There? Now, here, the situation being described is where researchers at a scientific facility they find an alien spaceship and that have been frozen for millions of years, and they thaw out its inhabitants. And these inhabitants turn out to be an alien that can assume form and memories of any creature that it meets. And this idea that the alien looks like us but isn't us is very common, even in today's movies and books. You're probably thinking Men in Black, and you should, right? The very premise is that there are people that look like us, but in fact, they're not. They're aliens. You may be thinking of the scrolls in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, aliens that can take our form. But this is very common also when talking about the people who don't belong here. They somehow can assume, blend in with the rest of us, but we know they're not one of us. And this kind of xenophobia is very much entrenched in the idea of the alien. Now, take for instance the body snatchers. This story here, alien spores arrive on Earth and develop into giant seed pods, and each one grows an exact replica of a particular human being. And then after which that human being is replaced, that human being is destroyed. And that you may also be thinking of do androids dream of electric sheep? by Philip Dick, or you probably know it as the movie version, Blade Runner, where replicants who have assumed the identity of a human being destroy or kill that human being in order to take their place among our society. But a local doctor in this story, in The Body Snatchers, finds an increasing number of patients claiming that their family members are different somehow. But yet, after some people come and tell the doctor, then they come back and they say, never mind. It wasn't what we thought it was. So he begins to realize that the town is gradually being taken over by alien replicas who share a group mind and have no emotion. Now, this particular work is often seen as a metaphor for groupthink in the early 1950s and communism altogether. And I'm not saying that these stories were deliberately written to portray an anxiety of the time, but I do think that the anxieties of the time give rise to these stories. Take, for instance, First Contact, used by Leinster's 1945 short story of the same title. This very idea of the first contact between an Earth spaceship crew and an alien spaceship crew, or first contact between human beings and aliens. Here's where two groups who are suspicious of each other and unsure of whether to contact the other group, um, because you don't know if the meeting could end in disaster or it might be beneficial. So there's a consideration of should we make the contact and what would it mean if we do make the contact. Now, this dilemma is resolved when the two spaceship crews decide to disable their tracking mechanisms and destroy the navigational charts. And this allows them to benefit from each other's technology without risks. But the idea that this first contact, the should I make the approach? What would happen to me if I do? What would happen to them if I do? Right? This idea is as common as the early settlers arriving in North America. I mean, this idea is very common. Not only it's common in science fiction because it's common in our own individual life and the life of the writers. So when the questions posed by these alien encounters are, how would we communicate with aliens? Can we? And would we? And for what purpose? How do we identify aliens as intelligent or even alive? How do we know who is an alien and what characteristics give them away? And how do we preserve our own safety when encountering a civilization equal to or more advanced than our own? And this is particularly important in its relationship to war and to nations having to come together. So, take an example that I think puts a lot of these questions into play. Solaris by Lem reconsiders the question of alien intelligence from a literary point of view and asks whether we could ever hope to understand it at all. Sometimes the alien invasion depicted in these stories is so beyond our own understanding, and often it is beyond our own understanding because somehow they've either ascended to a higher level of thinking or their level of their thinking is collective, as opposed to our thinking, which is individual. So the story describes one of the most remarkable alien intelligence in science fiction, a planet almost entirely covered by an ocean of some sort, some water-like substance that sometimes seems to be a single living intelligence. So this idea of the collective mind being stronger, more powerful than the individual mind. And when the crew members of the Solaris station, located above the planet's surface, they try to bombard the ocean with powerful X-rays, it responds, the planet, by creating exact replicas of people drawn from painful parts of the crew members' lives. So the each of the members has to encounter a painful experience of their past. And at the end of the novel, it seems that we might be able to detect higher intelligence when we see it, but the prospect of communicating in a meaningful way is probably hopeless. But we're also left with the trace that somehow, if we could think as a group, we'd probably we might be better off because their thinking is so far beyond ours. The mote in God's eye is an example of the kind of communication that we're talking about, or the way we can make contact with intelligent alien species. So, in the 31st century, here's the narrative: humanity has established a vast galactic empire, but has yet to make contact with intelligent alien species. This changes when Rob Blaine, a spaceship commander, is sent to investigate what appears to be an alien spaceship near an astronomical anomaly. And it is called The Mote in God's Eye, wherein the title of the work. Um, the inhabitant of this alien ship is found dead, but the humans are able to track the ship back to its home planet. Now, the rest of the novel is dedicated to describing the various subspecies of these motes, whose civilizations have a difficult history of rising to technological heights, only to be reduced to primitive states by an uncontrollable urge to war, to wage war. So, when the human being makes contact with an alien species, it only encounters that it is like their own. So sometimes the alien stands in for our future. What would we be like in the future? So, but there's always that relationship that somehow the alien is the other, and it is also me, a representation of me, and sometimes the other. So when we're looking at aliens, we really are looking at blank slates, because on a literal level, the alien is it just means that we're not alone in the universe, and that there's something else out there, and that something else can take the shape of whatever we want because we don't know what it is. So on a metaphorical level, the alien is a blank slate to which we can project our fears, our hopes, and our dreams. And I argue that primarily we do this collectively. That is, not that the writer himself or herself is projecting these fears, but that what the writer feels is happening in their world and their nation, and the fears of the time they take on, they morph into the alien. So, and they also bear the meaning of alienation, the separation from other people, and the isolation that we might feel in a even global community. So, I want to end by asking questions about aliens and implying what they may mean about us. So, why do aliens seem to represent the unknown? And why do they often come from the unexplored? This is an important question because the alien representing the unknown is perhaps not only a trope of writing because it allows the writer the freedom to create as he chooses, but I think the alien representing the unknown is because that is the biggest thing we fear, that which is not what we're used to. The loss of the known is what we often think of as the unknown, and that is the greatest fear. And the idea that it can come from somewhere unexplored, that we don't know what it can do to us, this is a very big fear in every human society. So the alien, though they now take shape of an extraterrestrial, they also have a long history in humanity itself. So why are aliens depicted always in extremes? They're either better than us or worse than us. They're either more intelligent, stronger, taller, more loving, wiser, or they're undeveloped and cruel and ruthless, and they're monsters and they're bent on destruction. Think about Superman, right? The irony of Superman is that he's not a man, and yet he is better than all of us. He's the best American that ever lived. He's the best man that ever lived, and he's not a man. But why? And of course, there are aliens that do not fit these categories, but often aliens are done in extremes. Is it only a trope of writing that was started somewhere and has been continued by other writers, or does it say something about the way we view ourselves in relation to the world? Now, how come aliens look like us? And this I mean more physically: legs, arms, head, torso. Why do their bodies resemble ours? I have to wonder about that, and I wonder if it's simply a necessity, right? If we're going to depict them in movies, it'd be functional if they could look like us. There are plenty of movies that do not do this, but for the most part, aliens have a um, similar physiology to our own. But I think this happens for several reasons. So my theories are that it happens because there's always the connection between the alien and me. Either we came from aliens, which a lot of works have discussed, works of shows and movies and books, and somehow the aliens, created us or some sort of derivative of alien. Or Somehow we believe that our bodies are the most functional, and we've ascended to the highest, or what we think may be the highest form of functionality. So, of course, the aliens would be like us, but maybe their necks are not as long, or maybe not. Maybe their heads are bigger because they have more brain. So, but that's the idea. I think that aliens look like us because of those two reasons, and I think they also look like us because we project ourselves, which is what I've been saying, onto these aliens, and I think that just goes to the point that we project all of ourselves into this alien. And the last question is, what exactly is the future of aliens in science fiction? What is the projected focus of alien depiction in science fiction narratives? How are aliens going to be depicted in the future? I mean, we've seen it all. We've seen all kinds of aliens right up to this point. So, what more is there? What's left? I think the alien of the future will continue to repeat some of the motifs that we've encountered throughout time. You're probably thinking movies and you're thinking TV shows or books that you've read, and all of these I think will be repeated in some way. But I think the uh, future of the alien is a kind of manifest destiny. I think that in some way, at least in narratives, that is, we're going to see it that as our right to explore what's out there, whether a moon or another planet that is nearby. And when we do, whatever living organisms we encounter, I think we will see it as a necessity to eradicate. I think that's the future of alien depiction and narratives, a kind of repeat of manifest destiny. Somehow I feel that this is the collective concern um, of the writers of science fiction in the time. Well, that is the end of lecture 8.